Most people think the worst thing a family can do is hit you. They're wrong. The worst thing is when they steal the only thing that was truly yours, your time, your effort, your very presence, and then ask you to thank them for the privilege of being discarded. My brother built his entire image on a foundation of luxury that I maintained with my own hands, my sleepless nights, and my silence. My parents, they didn't just look the other way, they held the door open for him while I was left in the rain. Family betrayal isn't a sudden explosion. It's a slow architectural erosion. It's the feeling of being a live-in servant in a house where you were supposed to be a daughter. It's the quiet realization that you are the glue holding a structure together, yet you are the only part of the building that never gets painted, never gets noticed, and is eventually meant to be scraped away. When the person who is supposed to protect you is the one handing the knife to your betrayer, you learn a special kind of silence. It's not the silence of the defeated. It's the silence of the architect who knows exactly which load-bearing wall to pull. Welcome to Roast and Reckoning, where silence ends and truth begins. Get comfortable, grab your coffee. My name is Maya, and I am 28 years old. The people in this story had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose to do the easy thing instead. But in the world of high-stakes legacies, the easy path usually leads to a cliff. For the last 5 years, my life was measured in the rhythmic, mechanical wheeze of an oxygen concentrator and the cloying, sweet scent of dried lavender. While my peers were in the city building careers, falling in love, and finding themselves in crowded bars, I was the clandestine heartbeat of the Blackwood Estate, a sprawling, $12 million monument to a family history that was currently rotting from the inside out. I was 23 when I moved back into the East Wing to care for Grandma Evelyn. At the time, my father, Richard, and my mother, Diane, called it a sacred duty. They spoke of family values with a reverence that suggested they intended to share the burden. But as the months turned into years, the sacred duty became a convenient cage. I became the invisible caretaker, the one who knew exactly which medication Grandma needed at 3 a.m. by the sound of her cough alone. I learned the architecture of her silence, translating her labored breaths into needs for water, for a turned pillow, or for the simple comfort of a hand to hold in the dark. My hands, once soft and reaching for a future in design, became chapped and raw from the constant cycle of antiseptic and cleaning. I smelled of lavender oil and medical-grade soap, a scent that never quite left my skin no matter how long I showered. I lived in a windowless room on the edge of the East Wing, a space that felt less like a bedroom and more like a staging area for a tragedy. If you walked down the main gallery of Blackwood, you would see the architecture of my invisibility. The hallway was a shrine to Ethan, my 30-year-old brother. My parents had curated a gallery of his life that felt more like a propaganda museum than a home. There were framed photos of his luxury vacations in the Maldives, his skin tanned, a cocktail in hand, while I was back at the estate, changing soiled linens. There were Star of the Month plaques from business ventures that my parents had funded with investments that never saw a return. There were shots of him leaning against European sports cars with a golden boy grin, the kind of smile that suggested he had conquered the world when, in reality, he hadn't even conquered his own credit card debt. I wasn't in those photos. Not because I wasn't there, but because I was the one holding the camera. I was the one in the shadows making sure the lighting was right, making sure the background was clear, and making sure the family looked perfect. I was the one who captured Ethan's triumphs, while the reality of my own life was cropped out of the frame. My absence from the family's visual history was a calculated choice made by Richard and Diane. If they didn't have to see me, they didn't have to acknowledge the debt they owed me. My father, Richard, ran our family like a corporate production floor where Ethan was the only product worth marketing. Richard was a man who measured worth in handshakes and the label on a bottle of scotch. My mother, Diane, was his primary enabler, a woman who loved both her children but loved one of them much louder than the other. Together, they had built a gilded altar for Ethan. Ethan had a talent not for success, but for arriving exactly when the applause started. He was the senior partner of a venture capital firm that existed primarily as a flashy website and a high-rent office in the city, both paid for by my parents. He dressed in tailored suits that cost more than my annual allowance for caretaking. He smelled of expensive, woodsy cologne, the kind that announces a man's presence before he says a word, but the rot was deep. Underneath the Italian leather shoes and the easy talk of disrupting markets, Ethan was a hollow shell. He had a habit of borrowing from the family's emergency funds to cover his liquidity issues. He was drowning in debt, a clandestine failure that he managed to hide under a layer of arrogance. My parents ignored the mounting warning signs, treating his every mundane breath as a triumph of the human spirit while dismissing my 5 years of sacrifice as an expected family contribution. To them, I was a line item that didn't need to be reconciled. Then, the light went out. Grandma Evelyn passed away on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are always the days when the world shifts. She died holding my hand, her eyes finally clear of the fog that had clouded them for years. For me, it was a moment of profound, heartwarming grief. She was the only person who truly saw me. In those quiet hours of the night, when the rest of the house was asleep, she would squeeze my hand and whisper, "I know, Maya. I see what you're doing. They don't deserve you." But for the rest of the family, the grief was a thin veil over cold, financial opportunism. The body wasn't even cold before I heard Richard in the hallway talking to a realtor. At the funeral, I was treated like the hired help. Richard and Diane hovered around Ethan, who played the grieving heir for the cameras of the local socialites. He stood by the casket with a handkerchief, his eyes already scanning the cemetery for the wealthy neighbors who might be interested in a $12 million estate. I was asked to help with the catering during the wake. I stood in the kitchen of the house I had maintained for half a decade, serving sandwiches to people who didn't even know my name. The true reckoning began a week later. We sat in the formal dining room, the air thick with the smell of floor wax and the heavy, oppressive silence of a house that had lost its soul. Richard didn't waste time. He slid a folder across the polished mahogany table, not to me, but toward Ethan. "The estate is valued at $12 million, Richard said, his voice level and clinical. "We've decided to sell immediately. Ethan's current venture is at a critical juncture, and he needs the capital to stabilize and scale. This is about protecting the family's future." "And what about Maya?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it seemed to grate against the silence of the room. Diane looked at me with that patient, condescending whisper she used when she wanted me to disappear. "Maya, honey, be reasonable. You've been a burden on the family resources for too long. You've lived here for free for 5 years. You haven't built a career, you haven't contributed to the legacy. You should be grateful we're giving you anything at all after you've just been sitting in this house." "Family helps family, Maya," Ethan added, leaning back in his chair, a smug, woodsy-scented predator. "I'm the one who can actually grow this wealth. You're young, you'll figure something out. Maybe you can go back to school or find a nice entry-level job." Richard reached under the table and pulled out a small, battered cardboard box. It was covered in a fine layer of attic dust. He slid it across the table toward me. It landed with a dull thud. "This is your share," Richard said. "Grandma wanted you to have her personal effects. It's mostly junk from the attic. Old recipes, handwritten notes, clutter. Ethan needs the capital. You get the memories. It's only fair." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I looked at the box, then at the 3 people sitting across from me. They looked like strangers. I felt a cold, sharp vindication beginning to form in the pit of my stomach, a sensation like ice water running through my veins. I took the box and left the room without a word. Back in my small room, I sat on the edge of the bed and began to sift through the trash. At first, it was exactly what they said. Faded napkins with lemon cake recipes. Notes about when to prune the hydrangeas. A single knitted baby booty. But as I reached the bottom, I found a silk scarf wrapped tightly around a leather-bound volume. It was Grandma's secret diary I spent the next 6 hours reading. Her voice came alive on the page, and it was devastatingly lucid. She hadn't been nearly as far gone as the family assumed. She had seen everything. She had written about the way Richard and Diane spoke about her as if she were a piece of furniture. She had documented the way Ethan would come into her room when I was asleep to ask for the location of her jewelry, and she had written about me. September 14th, the entry read. Maya is still here. She thinks I don't see her crying in the hallway when she thinks she's alone. She is the only one with a heart in this house of ghosts. Richard and Diane are already measuring the walls for the sale. Ethan is a thief in a tailored suit. They think I am senile. They think I don't see them. They won't have it. I won't let them take the only thing Maya has left. Inside the back cover of a worthless old book of poetry tucked at the very bottom of the box, I found a clandestine envelope. Inside were the original property deeds and a finalized, notarized codicil. It was a legal masterstroke. 2 years ago, while I was taking Grandma to her checkups, she had made a detour to her private attorney. She had quietly transferred the entire $12 million estate, the house, the surrounding 300 acres, the offshore investment accounts, and the family trusts, into a private LLC. She had named me as the sole member and executor. The house wasn't Richard's to sell. The money wasn't Ethan's to reinvest. They were living in my house, eating at my table, and planning a future with my money. I decided to stay silent. For the next 2 weeks, I acted the part of the invisible servant one last time. I became the clandestine observer of my own life. I cleaned the house for the staging company. I moved the heavy furniture while Ethan stood by with a cup of coffee, complaining about the pacing of the movers. I listened through the vents as Ethan bragged to his creditors on the phone, promising them a massive payday by the end of the month. I watched my parents pick out a luxury condo in the city, spending money that didn't exist. Every time they told me to hurry up or stay out of the way, I simply smiled. There is a kind of patience that looks like weakness. It isn't. It's the patience of someone who knows exactly when the bridge will hold their weight. I was counting the minutes until the architecture of their lies collapsed. The day of the final walkthrough arrived. The $12 million estate was at its peak. The sunlight hit the marble floors just right, and the scent of expensive lilies filled the foyer. High-end buyers, a pair of tech executives from Washington, D.C., were there with their team of lawyers and a lead architect. Richard and Diane were dressed in their finest, looking like the benevolent masters of the manor. Ethan was there, too, leaning against the kitchen island with that golden boy grin, already acting like the deal was done. Everything is in order, Richard said to the buyer's lawyer, a pen in his hand, ready to sign the preliminary transfer. We've cleared the title, and the estate is ready for immediate possession. I stepped forward into the center of the kitchen. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the cold, architectural precision of a woman who had spent 5 years learning how to build a life out of shadows. Actually, Richard, you don't have the authority to sign anything. The room went silent. Richard laughed, that dismissive, gavel-like sound he used to end conversations. Maya, don't be ridiculous. Put the tray down. The adults are talking. I didn't flinch. I pulled the notarized codicil and the updated deeds from my folder, the ones my own attorney had verified 3 days prior, and slid them across the marble island. They came to a stop right in front of the buyer's lawyer. I am the adult here, I said, looking Richard directly in the eye. And this is my house. The buyer's lawyer picked up the papers. His eyes widened as he scanned the seals and the trust documentation. He looked at Richard, then at the deeds, then back at me. Mr. Adams, the lawyer said, his voice dropping an octave. These documents show that the property was transferred to a private trust 2 years ago. Ms. Maya is the sole beneficiary and executor. You don't own this property. Richard's face went from tan to paper in about 3 seconds. Diane gripped the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. Ethan's grin didn't just disappear, it shattered. This is forged. Ethan shouted, his voice cracking like a boy's. She's been jealous of me for years. This is some pathetic revenge fantasy because we didn't give her enough from the attic. I looked at the buyer's lawyer. Please, check the notary records. Check the electronic filings with the county. My grandmother was very thorough when she decided who she could trust. The lawyer pulled out his tablet. After a minute of frantic clicking, he looked at the buyers. The documents are legitimate. The sale cannot proceed. We are leaving. The buyers looked at my parents with a mixture of disgust and confusion. They gathered their things and walked out without a word. I followed them to the door, then turned back to my family. They were still standing in my kitchen, looking like ghosts. You have 1 hour to pack your personal belongings, I said. My voice was level, conversational, like I was discussing the weather. The rest of the furniture stays. It belongs to the estate. You are currently trespassing on private property. Maya, you can't do this, Diane whispered, the guilt trip whisper she'd used for decades. We're your parents. Ethan is your brother. Family helps family. I spent 5 years helping this family while I was invisible to you. I replied I was the only one who helped the person who actually built this wealth. Now, I'm visible. And I'm telling you to leave. You said I was a burden, and that I should be grateful for what I was given. Well, I'm grateful Grandma gave me the means to never see any of you again. I watched from the portico as they loaded their things into Ethan's financed SUV, the one I knew would be repossessed within the month once his creditors realized the payday was a lie. The fall of the Golden House was silent and absolute. Within weeks, Ethan's firm collapsed. Without the estate sale to bail him out, his creditors circled like sharks. Richard and Diane realized they had lost their retirement, their home, and the daughter who had been their only true foundation. I went full no contact. I changed the locks, the phone numbers, and the narrative. I didn't sell the house. Instead, I transformed the $12 million estate into the Foundations of Peace, a charity and respite center for long-term caregivers, the invisible people who hold the world together while everyone else is looking at the photos in the hallway. I moved my own life to a city that sees me, a place where my work is recognized for its own merit. I am no longer the one holding the camera, I am the one in the frame. Sometimes, people ask me if I miss them. I tell them I miss the family I wished I had, not the one that asked me to thank them for stealing my life. They were so focused on the architecture of their own vanity that they forgot to check the foundation. And when the foundation is built on the back of someone you've tried to make invisible, eventually, you're the one who disappears. Apologies are just the sound a door makes when it finally unsticks. Subscribe for more reckonings. Take your time, you belong here.